It's the week of October 29th, 2018, and you're listening to the Missouri GrowingPoint Agronomy podcast. I'm your co-host, Pioneer Field Agronomist Jaime Farmer, and with me as always are my counterparts to the east and west, Nick Monnig and Scott Dickey. Welcome back to the show, and welcome back, fellas. Folks, last time we talked in depth there about some of the issues we're seeing with our soybean crop, some of the seed quality, shatter, and sprouting that we've seen. As some of the guys are now starting to finish up harvest, today we're going to start moving our focus from harvest to more of those post-harvest activities. And so one of the biggest topics we wanted to hit today with this episode is around fall anhydrous applications. So applying anhydrous in the fall is a common practice for some operations in Missouri. After seeing a few wagons and toolbars stirring around last week, we thought it would be good to provide some best management practices for fall applications. So with that, fellas, welcome back to the show. And Nick, what are some of the things that we need to first think about when we're thinking about anhydrous applications?
Yeah, Jamie, before we start talking about fall applications, best management practices, it's really important to understand how that whole process works. So whenever we apply anhydrous to the soil, we apply it as anhydrous ammonia, which is a gas. NH3 is kind of the chemical makeup. And biggest thing just to understand there is that whenever you apply that in the soil, it's going to react really quickly with water. That's going to change it to NH4 plus or ammonium, which is very stable in the soil. So that process happens really quickly, converts to ammonium, which is a positive charge. Just think of soil as being a negative charge. That works really well. Ammonium is very stable in the soil. It's not losable when it becomes wet up to the atmosphere through denitrification or leachable on down the soil profile. The problem is that over time, though, and with temperature, that ammonium gets converted over to what we call nitrate. That's a bacterial-mediated process, and that nitrate is a negative charge, and that nitrate is losable in the soil, whether it be from leaching down into the ground or whether that be through denitrification or just going out as a gas in the atmosphere when we get really wet and really saturated. That bacterial-mediated process from ammonium to nitrate, that's what we call nitrification. So, Scott, when it comes to nitrification, what's the one way that we can kind of mitigate that risk?
Well, Nick, one of the most important things we have to consider is the soil temperature. Converting the ammonium to nitrate is a bacterially driven process, and much like us, the bacteria activity really starts to fall off once temperatures drop. And 50 degrees is kind of that key temperature of where biological activity in the soil really starts to fall off. So, Nick, back to your original question, I think one of the main things we can do is make sure that when we begin applying ammonia to our soils, that the soil temperatures are at least 50 degrees or below and trending downward. Because one of the things we see occasionally is people will start when soil temps are near that 50-degree range, but as we increase temperatures, we see spikes in soil temp well above 50 degrees, and that begins the process of converting the ammonium to nitrate earlier in the year.
That's a good point, Scott. So 50 degrees trending downward, that's definitely what we want to see. Another way to slow this nitrification process, or essentially that conversion of anhydrous to a losable form of nitrate, is to utilize Insurv. So Insurv is a nitrification inhibitor, or in other words, a nitrogen stabilizer that blocks the conversion of ammonia to nitrate. So Insurv helps preserve your nitrogen application in the ammonium non-losable form longer. If you look at some of the university data out there, University of Minnesota has done some work looking at the impact of Insurv to preserve ammonium at various soil temperatures. What they have found that Insurv preserves ammonium longer regardless of temperature when compared to anhydrous application without Insurv. However, when the soil temperature is 50 degrees and below, like Scott just mentioned, the ability of Insurv to preserve ammonium versus no Insurv utilized is exponentially different, meaning that adding Insurv to fall anhydrous applications can be immensely beneficial.
So one other thing, Jamie, I'll just mention there is that you'll hear of a lot of other nitrogen stabilizers to be used with anhydrous ammonia when we're applying it, but just be sure you know what you're getting, because there are a lot of them out there that don't really have any kind of proven mechanism when it comes to slowing down that nitrification process or inhibiting it. There's some other ones out there too, like DCD, which has been utilized before in the past and is a nitrification inhibitor, but maybe doesn't work to the same degree that Insurv does.
Yeah, that's a good point. There's a lot of other things out there, and I know, with input cost and trying to manage that, maybe be more apt to look at some of the more economical options, but obviously you want to make sure that you're getting what you're paying for too. And so utilizing some of that university data, I mean, there's 42 years of data on Insurv out there that shows that it works and it does what it says it does and stabilizes that nitrogen.
And Jamie, one more thing too. Sometimes you get the question a lot that maybe instead of buying the Insurv, I should just take that money and buy more nitrogen and fix the problem. But reality, that doesn't really fix the problem. I always kind of use the analogy of a hole in a dam. You know, we can't fix that hole by adding more water. We actually have to fix the problem, and that's how it works with nitrification and loss via that system.
Yeah, Nick, that's a good point. And another thing that, you know, we often get a question on Insurv is guys adjusting the Insurv rate based on the amount of nitrogen that they're putting out there on that field, whether it's 120 pounds or 200 pounds of nitrogen. That rate for Insurv is not based on the pounds of nitrogen you're putting out there. It's based on a per acre rate because you're treating the bacteria out there per acre. And so with that quart per acre, you know, it doesn't really matter what the nitrogen level is that you're applying on that field. You're essentially using that anhydrous as a carrier for Insurv to go out there and treat the bacteria levels in that field that are controlling that nitrification process. With that, something else, Dickey, we were talking a little bit about seeing some of those applicators stirring. Another thing that we're seeing start to stir in some few places is some fall applications, some fall herbicide applications. So with that in mind, I know we're starting to see some of these fields green up a little bit, you know, but what are some of the things guys might need to think about when it comes to fall herbicide applications, some of the benefits they might get out of that?
Yeah, Jamie, in the last week or so, as we've been spending time with growers out in the fields at harvest, like you said, the fields have really started to turn green, and in some cases, the mat of chickweed and henbit that we're seeing in some of these fields is becoming fairly extreme. And with the slightly warmer weather at times, like we're seeing this week, you know, some of the growth of those winter annuals will be pretty aggressive. So we'll start to see some pretty heavy cover, and that cover can result in some problems next spring for us whenever we get ready to plant. You know, having that dense mat of the winter annual weeds laying there can cause interference with the planter, so we don't plant as effectively as we could if the mat of those weeds wasn't present. Another big issue we can run into in parts of Missouri in the spring is black cutworms, and any of those fields that have the dense green mat laying out there in the spring when the moths start flying in from the south can cause us to have target areas where the moths will land and lay their eggs, which could result in bigger issues with black cutworm in cornfields. Another big issue that we deal with is soil temperatures when we have heavy mats of the winter annuals present. We've seen some big differences in soil temp when you measure bare ground compared to ground that is covered with a mat of weeds, and that can cause differences in emergence as well as tied to those planter issues we've seen. Nutrient tie-up is another issue that we see sometimes when we have a thick mat of winter annuals present. And one other reason for us to treat in the fall to control these weeds is to reduce some of our workload in the spring. The majority of winter annuals emerge at about this time or in the next few weeks. And if we can control them now when we get to next spring, for the most part, you will have a fairly clean seed bed.
That's a good point with the fall herbicide, Scott. Something that farmers all too familiar with in Missouri, having, you know, some of the least field workable days when it comes to spring field operations. So being able to spread out some of that workload in the fall. We talked about that a little bit here with our anhydrous applications. You can do a little bit of that too with your herbicide applications as well. Something we saw in 2018 too, just to add to that, is moisture differences in the field, where we had patches of winter annuals versus patches of dry ground. There was a pretty big spread, not only in the temperature, but also in the moisture in those different parts of the field. So that also affected germination and the evenness of those stands. So in the drought year, definitely made a big difference too, being able to control that. But I would say for us in Missouri, maybe the biggest benefit of a fall herbicide program would be mare's tail control. Mare's tail is definitely in the top 3 biggest weed issues for us as far as the state of Missouri goes. The best way to control mare's tail is to utilize that fall herbicide application. The most problematic mare's tail typically emerges in the fall, and a fall residual herbicide can attack it when it is smaller, more susceptible to that herbicide at that growth stage. So fall herbicides such as Canopy EX when going to soybeans in the spring, or Basis Blend when going to corn in the spring, are very effective mare's tail controls. Elvor is another product that can be utilized to target that mare's tail in the late fall, and that can work for corn or soybeans. So we've got some good programs out there to utilize in a fall herbicide application, but definitely something that if you have a mare's tail problem in your field in recent years, you'd strongly consider using that fall program to get after those mare's tail.
Yeah, Jamie, maybe one other thing just to mention is once that mare's tail gets up and bolting, as they call it, or growing erect in the spring, it gets harder and harder to control.
Yeah, that's definitely what we're trying to avoid there, and an easy way to do that's that fall application. So with that, folks, we thank you for your time, and we thank you for listening. Thank you for your business. Nick, it's always important for folks to know where to find us if they can't find us in the field.
They can find us at podcast.pioneer.com. They can find me on Twitter at Nick Monnig.
At Dickey Scott.
And at the Jaime Farmer. And so again, we thank you for your time. We thank you for listening. As always, feel free to reach out to your local Pioneer sales professional and get signed up for those agronomic updates delivered to your inbox, Walking Your Fields newsletter, and other timely agronomic info. And with that, we thank you for your time. We thank you for your business, and we look forward to speaking with you again.